Well, haven't we got a lot to talk about? I'm sorry these disappeared for a while. My bad. I was going to do individual race by race ones to catch up. I just decided though with not quite remembering when news broke and when things broke and what happened exactly, it was just going to be easier to do a big bumper episode where we kind of rapid fire through the 11 races that have happened since there was one of these, talk about the news that's broke, talk about some other things that are going on, and hopefully kind of catch up to speed ahead of the USGP, which is this weekend, because lots has been going on, let's just put it that way. That is why they haven't been here. I am sorry. I know I kept saying on and on, I keep coming back to them, but here we are back, and we are going to talk through basically half of the 2021 season in one go. This is going to be a bit rapid versus what I would normally do on a race only episode, just because we've got so many races to get through, and if I talk for 20 minutes about each, we are literally going to be here for 2 hours. Nobody wants that. So let me take you back to the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, where Red Bull is starting to show some very good pace, and Mercedes is starting to get hot under the collar, because they may indeed have competition this year, and it's going to be a fight for both championships and not just a walk in the park as it has been in past years. Baku is obviously another street circuit, so Red Bull were pegged to be pretty good at this one, with the engine speed not necessarily meaning as much at a circuit like this, and the possibility of incident being so much higher, a bit like Monaco. So it's normally a race where teams who don't have the best engine power, or the best engine speed, sorry, and don't normally have the best luck, this is normally where they try and optimize, because this is one of the few opportunities. So Max Verstappen was off the back of his win in Spain, looking to do the same in Azerbaijan. The Red Bull looked like it had got the pace, and they looked like a car to be contending with. Ferrari had optimized in qualifying to put Charles Leclerc on pole, and he was split by Verstappen by Hamilton. Now I think Ferrari didn't really consider they'd be doing much to hold up the Red Bull and the Mercedes in this race at all, as it hadn't really been the time. It hadn't really been shown they had the pace to even fight with them. Their fight was definitely not with the top two, but more with McLaren in the midfield, or the top of the midfield, if you will, because we've kind of got weird splits this year. But as expected, very quickly, both Hamilton and Verstappen were past Leclerc for the front of the race. Now, the biggest thing that happened in this race was Max Verstappen's tyre blowout, which took him out of the lead of the race and plummeted him out of the points, and gave Hamilton a really good opportunity to score some great points. But Hamilton made a very big mistake going into the first corner at the safety car restart, trying to pass Sergio Perez, which then gave us the odd podium of Perez, Vettel, Gasly. This was also Sergio Perez's first race victory for Red Bull Racing, so good to get the monkey off your back from that one, and it was a well-deserved race. He done really well fighting back up the grid from 7th, so a great drive from him, clever strategy from the team, and an all-round well-done job. Verstappen hadn't been the only tyre blowout in the race. Lance Stroll came out of the race around lap 18 as well with a tyre blowout, which did kind of start putting the questions on Pirelli on the tyre compound choices they had and the pressures they were choosing, which obviously had knock-on effects into the rest of the season, but primarily onto the next race at Paul Ricard in France. But at the circuit Paul Ricard, things were kind of back to normal, back to as expected, with Ferrari and Red Bull locking out the top 4 positions, with Verstappen on pole, Hamilton just behind him. It was a Mercedes 2-3, which gave them the edge, but by the end of the race, Perez had claimed that position from Bottas, giving us a 1-3 from Red Bull and a 2-4 from Mercedes. McLaren was starting to really do a good job as well, really starting to pull away from Ferrari and really starting to securely dominate themselves as the 3rd fastest car on the grid, leaving Ferrari a little bit in their tyre track. Ferrari definitely had a lot of work to do at this point in the season and was slowly trying to regain some engine pace, trying to regain some ground on the rest of the field. Again, it was never going to be enough within the confines of a season to bring them suddenly into the title and championship fights, but they were indeed working behind the scenes to try and get a little bit more pace out of that car, out of that engine. Aston Martin did as they usually do, qualified just outside the top 10, but both cars managing to finish inside the top 10, getting the jumps on the Alpines, the AlphaTauris, and one of the Ferraris. At this point of the season, Ferrari were kind of stuck in that midfield fight with Aston Martin, with Alpine, with AlphaTauri, because there's too many A's this season and it's killing my brain. But it was at this point where McLaren were really kind of pulling ahead and gaining that advantage that they currently, at the current moment in the championship, have on Ferrari. We then then moved into the doubleheader in Austin, which Red Bull dominated with a double victory for Max Verstappen. Red Bull hasn't been the best performing at the Red Bull Ring in the past, ironically, but in the last few years, Red Bull really has seemed to come through strong with the pace at the circuit, almost as if they know they should be doing good at their own race circuit. So I've been putting a little bit more pressure on those races maybe to get the team in tip-top condition and make sure that that goes as well as it should. And then it comes the Great British Grand Prix, or that's right, that is right, which brought us our first sprint race weekend, which was interesting. Now, as I spoke so much about this in the build-up and then proceeded to not make the video once the event had gone by, I just like to take some time right here, right now to talk about the sprint weekend, the kind of the format, how I think it went, my kind of thoughts and feelings on it, because I did promise them months ago, and lo and behold, some of you may have waited for them a while, so here they are. Obviously, for those, just a quick recap on the sprint weekend format. It's it's a single practice session on the Friday, and then a qualifying, standard normal qualifying with a Q1, Q2, Q3 lineup on the Friday afternoon, evening, whatever, what would have normally been FP2. That then places the grid for a sprint race on Saturday. Saturday's format, we've got the second practice and final practice session Saturday morning, and then Saturday afternoon, where what would have normally been qualifying, you have the sprint race, which is normally like 10 to 12 laps because it's only 1,000 kilometers. I want to say that sounds right. I'm going to correct it on screen right now if I'm wrong. And basically, they determine the order of the grid cometh the race on Sunday. Sundays stay exactly the same. The weird thing about the Saturday sprint races, which confused me when I was trying to do some championship calculations the other day, is that you get points for first, second, and third in that sprint race. So it's 3 points for first, 2 points for second, and 1 point for third. Nobody else scores. And it's the most pointless thing in the world. It skews the championship. I've definitely discussed this before, but it skews the championship. It puts a little bit more weight and importance on 3 races this year rather than all of them being consistent and worth the same thing. In terms of the format itself, I wasn't mad at it. It was okay. It's a little bit confusing when it comes to those weekends because you're like, oh right, it's not free practice 2 now, is it? It's actual qualifying. I actually have to pay attention and watch that. It's a weird time to do that event because that is a time where, depending on when the races are going on, European timings, early in the morning, midday, in the evenings, whatever. If they're in the evening, that's kind of, it works. But the early in the morning ones or the midday ones that would the like 3 o'clock FP2 ones where they take that slot, it doesn't work for a lot of people because you have to assume that F1's main and biggest audience is in Europe, right? On a European time zone or UK time zone, so within an hour of each other. Okay, so we're going to just call them the European time zone, and that covers everyone, but you know what I'm talking about when I say that. So when you pick a race time, an event time for something that's quite crucial to the weekend and put it in a time where people can't easily watch it because they're usually at work or whatever, it's not going to be as popular. I don't understand why you would do it like that. I mean, I understand wanting to do the qualifying session ahead of the sprint race day, so each day has its highlight rather than having Friday just be practice day as it is now, and then Saturday being sprint qualifying and then qualifying sprint race. Nope. Sprint qualifying and then sprint race day and then race on Sunday. So I get why you're wanting to break it up like that, but to me it doesn't make any logical sense that that event takes place for European races in the middle of a European working day on a Friday. It's just an odd time to do it. But in terms of the format itself, I'm not mad at it. I think that's fine. I quite like the format. It does make Saturdays a little bit more interesting, or at least it makes Fridays a little bit more interesting. Saturday was always interesting because of quali. I still stand by there's no reason to change qualifying because it works, but I think it's been made very clear at this point that that's not why they've tried this sprint race. That's not why they're talking about bringing the sprint race in permanently next year. It's just a bit of a shake-up of the event to make all of the days more interesting, to make all of the days a bit more worthwhile, to get a bit more racing on track. And it's not necessarily a case of wanting to change and replace qualifying, but a way of expanding it to slightly different. Now, I am going to touch on this. It doesn't align with the British Grand Prix at all, but it does align with what we're talking about, because obviously we're talking about things that happened ages ago, and we're here with a lot more information than we had now, because obviously at this point we've already had Italy, which was also a sprint race weekend, which we'll talk about more in a minute. But from what I'm hearing, the idea for next year is to keep this sprint race event thingy going on. The format to remain the same as it would be on a sprint race weekend. So Friday, FP1 qualifying, Saturday, FP2 sprint race, Sunday, race day. But the sprint race on the Saturdays is nothing got to do with the actual race event on Sundays. I think qualifying from Friday is going to stand for Sunday. And this sprint race is just a race to have some fun, to mix things up. I don't know. I don't really know what they're planning on doing with it, but they're scrapping the points idea, which ironically I don't understand, because if you're making every race the same format and you want to add an extra 3 points available maximum to whomever wins that race, but that's going to be for every race of the season, then I genuinely have no problem with that. So that's a bit confusing as well, but they're going to scrap the points, and as far as I'm aware, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, I think they're planning on just having it as its own standalone thing. Now, if I'm a race driver, I don't want to risk my car for the day later's race, which is important because it is where I'm scoring points, for this random little race in the middle, just to appease some fans who want a bit more racing. I'd much prefer 2 practice sessions on a Friday, practice session on a Saturday, and the qualifying on Saturday, and then race on Sunday. You've still got your 5 events, the cars are going to go out for all of them. Do that thing you used to do, or do the thing you do in Q3? I don't know, there was a thing they used to do where they gave them free sets of tyres. Or like it was practice. For the first half hour of practice, everybody had a free set of tyres that they could just go out, burn up, didn't matter what happened, it didn't count towards their allocation. And that was to encourage the drivers and the teams to actually get out on track and do some racing. And obviously rain is always going to be a factor that's going to stop cars going out on track, because they don't want to risk it for the race on Sunday where they're scoring the points. So weirdly, you had me on board to change the format and go with this sprint race quali, whatever you want to call it. I was more than happy with it. It was different, but you kept the Q1, Q2, Q3 quali element in that I like. You were just adapting the weekend a little bit. I was fully on board, and then you went, but we're going to change the entire thing and actually make the whole thing pointless. So F1, if you're watching, please don't do that. If you're going to bring this in, keep it as it is currently. Keep the Saturday sprint race as part of the qualifying process, because you do get weird races where someone has an incident or someone gets punted off in the sprint race, and then they're starting way out of position on Sunday, and that's kind of the reason you wanted to do the sprint race, to kind of mix up the grid, right? So I do that, have that sprint race have worth, give it reason to go racing. And if you want to put points on it, I mean, if you don't want to put points on it, don't put points on it. But if you do, like, if it's consistent across all the races, there's zero reason why you can't put points on it. That's all up to your interpretation and what you actually want to do. Although one thing I will say is, if you are going to keep points for sprint races, please change your app so that when you look at the race result or whatever, there should just be like a total points for the weekend. So when you're looking on the app to find out results, you don't get confused while your spreadsheet is calculating why Hamilton has 6 points less than he should, because you've missed the 3 and, well, no, it must not have been 6, but whatever. It missed the sprint race points because I couldn't find them on the app. So make that clearer. The other thing to talk about from the British Grand Prix was that incident. The one at Copse with Verstappen and Hamilton. Now, everyone's got their opinion on this. Everyone thinks what they think about whether he was penalised enough, whether the penalty was enough. Red Bull, I think, went a little over the top because they saw an opportunity to maybe get some assistance in the championship. That's me being a bit on the edge here as we discuss it, and I'm trying to be careful, but you know, it's one of those where Red Bull did have the momentum, and you know, off the back of the double win in Austria, they really did have the momentum, and they were starting to look like a threat. And then they lost a lot of points to Hamilton because Hamilton had taken Verstappen out. To move away from politics, because that is a dangerous road to walk down, yes, the incident was more Hamilton's fault than Verstappen's, right? That's what I think. And I think, yes, Hamilton should have been penalised because at the end of the day, he carried on and Verstappen didn't. Okay, talk about the incident all you want, or what you think of it, or whether you think it was dangerous. I'm sorry, if the shoe was on the other foot, Verstappen would have gone for the same gap. So they're racing drivers, you expect them to push the limits. This is really the first time we've also seen Verstappen and Hamilton actually fighting for something on track, right? In the past, it's been a race win, but aside from that, it's not really been much. And to be fair, Verstappen has not been in a car that's been able to compete with Hamilton. So this is the first season we're actually really seeing them fight against each other for more than just a few points or a race win glory, right? So this is a different kind of psychology behind them as well. They're both very aggressive in their driving style. I stand by believing if you put the shoe on the other foot, Verstappen would have done exactly the same thing. Call outs for it being dangerous driving and nearly killing Max and Italy. Let's just let it go, okay? Because I think we all need to... It was a racing incident at the end of the day, but saying that, I do stand by Hamilton getting the penalty because at the end of the day, racing incident or not, one car did not carry on and the other did, right? So in that case, you have to kind of see it as, well, clearly this car is more at fault than this car because unless it's a blatantly obvious, right? We're towing with grey lines and stuff. But bottom line, pretty much a racing incident, I think, but I do stand by Hamilton getting the penalty. I also stand by Hamilton getting the penalty he got. Don't think it should have been much worse than it was. I think the 10-second penalty, I mean, had his car been more damaged, that penalty would have been really damaging. Had he had to stop for a new tyres or a new front nose, that 10 seconds would have been really damaging because it would have been on top of another pit stop. Luckily for Hamilton, he didn't need to pit after that incident. He could carry on with the damage he got on the car without too much deficit to him, which meant he only lost that 10 seconds in the first pit stop. And again, having that 10 seconds in the pit stop gave him the race to recover that time. And it was, at the end of the day, 10 seconds in the fastest car at the time on the grid. So I can understand why people don't think it's fair because he still won that race, even though he kind of took Verstappen out of the race, right? So I get why people don't think it's fair. But my personal opinion on it was that that's exactly how it should have been handled. I wouldn't change the way it was handled, and Hamilton was just very, very lucky. Please feel free to disagree with me, and please feel free to carry on this discussion down in the coffee pot below. On to the Hungarian Grand Prix, which was quite different. This definitely brought up a result that no one was expecting, and I think if you put money on this winner, you'd have been minted because no one was going to predict that an Alpine, and if an Alpine, Ocon's Alpine, no offense Ocon, but no one was going to predict that Ocon's Alpine was ever going to win a race, let alone get a podium this season. Qualifying was fairly normal with a Mercedes 1-2 and a Red Bull 3-4. The scene was set to be a fairly normal race and it to all go as predicted as normal. Budapest is a circuit that does kind of favour to engine a little bit more with some long straights, but it's also one of those races that does throw up some curveballs. So it's always, the Hungarian Grand Prix is always one to keep an eye on because it is one that could just throw up a massive curveball in the middle. So the scene was set for a fairly normal race, so Red Bull versus Mercedes going into turn one, and well, damn it, that's what we got. Obviously, there was the tangle in the midfield which caught out Lando Norris, Sergio Perez, Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, and Valtteri Bottas. Bottas was the catalyst in that, unfortunately, knocking one of the Red Bulls into the McLaren, who knocked the other Red Bull, and then the Ferrari got tangled as well and being shunted. It was just a big mess, brought out the safety car. It was wet in Hungary, and you know, that does make the track slippery, it does make things different. Braking later is going to be more risky if you've got no grip on the tyres because it's wet. So a domino effect, but what it did do was really open up the opportunity for people who don't normally get to stand on the podium to stand on the podium. And my gosh, did we see that opportunity taken with both hands. So then we had the possibly funniest thing that's ever happened in Formula One, or since I've been watching it live, which was the one-car restart. We did another rolling start, and as the sun had broken through the clouds, everybody but Hamilton had decided to come in and change from the intermediate tyres to the slicks, which meant that going into turn 1 again was just Hamilton. Gridding up was just Hamilton. Only Hamilton took to the grid ahead of the restart of the race, and everybody else came to the pits and had a pit lane start. So of course, leading into the first corner, funnily enough, Hamilton was in the lead ahead of everybody, who filtered out quite nicely with 0 incident from the pit lane. So because of this decision, it did mean that a lap later, Hamilton came into the pits and lost a load of positions, which gave Ocon the net lead after a penalty for Russell because he overtook some of the cars in the pit lane before the pit lane line, which he's not allowed to do. So he had I can't remember what the penalty was now, but he had a penalty that basically knocked him down the order as well. Verstappen had also carried on just with a lot of side pod damage, and because we had that's why we did a rolling restart, because we had the red flag. That's what it was. They red flagged the race to clear all of the other cars off the track, and whilst they were doing that, Red Bull were allowed to fix Verstappen's car in the pit lane, so they did. So Verstappen was trying to work up the grid, Hamilton was dropping down the grid, and Ocon was leading, which didn't change until the end. Well, it didn't change at all. He took his first Grand Prix Formula 1 victory in the Hungarian Grand Prix in weird-ass circumstances. Carlos Sainz and Lewis Hamilton were trying to chase down Ocon, but the team had done an excellent job in getting him in a position where he could retain that lead and take it and cross the line with it. Now, when the checkered flag fell, Sebastian Vettel did cross the line second, but because of being unable to take the fuel sample they needed from the car at the end of the race for Parc Fermé, they basically disqualified the car, which was a real shame because it was a great drive from him as well. We don't need to waste too much time on the Belgian Grand Prix because it was the race that never happened. The most ridiculous rule in the world. There's no real answer to what they should have done instead, if I'm honest. It's a really hard one, and I don't envy them for being in that situation where they had to make the decision anyway, because it is a difficult one, because obviously safety has to come first, and it just wasn't safe to go racing. The iffing and ahhing and umming and ahhing and red flagging it to cause it to stop the clock so we could get going again if it lightened up, but then it just wasn't fair to the fans. It wasn't fair to the fans watching on TV, but specifically it wasn't fair to the fans in the grandstands, because they won't have been allowed to get a race refund because technically the race happened just 4 laps under safety car, which is a real hard. It's a bit like the Australian fans from 2020 who got mucked around because the FIA nor the organizer of the, is that the right word? That's not quite the right word, but you know what I mean. Neither of them wanted to be the one who pulled the pin on the race, because whomever did was the one who then had to fork out the bill to the team. But because there was so much mucking around, fans that had travelled from across the world couldn't get the money back on those flights because they'd taken them, because they were told there was going to be a Grand Prix that got cancelled. It just wasn't fair. And it's situations like that where it's not the teams who miss out, it's not the drivers who miss out, it's not the TV coverage or the media or the journalists who miss out, it's the fans. The fans get affected most by that because they're the ones who still pay the money to go but don't get those refunds, because technically clause CF 2596 of section B says that if the race is classified, then technically the race went ahead and you did sit in the grandstand for 4 hours, so technically you were at the race. It's just not fair to fans. There should be something in place to reimburse those fans for not getting their money's worth, if you will. Now, rain even is always going to be a factor in racing. It's always going to be a thing that doesn't enable us to go racing again, and that's just life. That's just what rain does. Nature doing its thing, right? You can't control that. So there's an element of it that just has to be like, meh, it happens. But there's just the mucking round of the whole, oh, we might go racing in 2 hours time, or you just pull the pin. If you can't postpone it to the next day, just pull the sodding pin. Get it out of the way, get it done, because it's just not fair to the fans at the track or other ones. Then we had the Dutch Grand Prix, the well-awaited Dutch Grand Prix. Is this the first? Yeah, the first, because it didn't go ahead last year, because the Dutch Grand Prix wouldn't go ahead without spectators. It nearly fell off again this year, but luckily they were allowed a third capacity, or 2/3 capacity, I think it was, so they went ahead with the race. So finally, we got racing at Zandvoort. One of the funniest stories I read about the Zandvoort Grand Prix was that the flares, the smoke-coloured flares, which were all orange, were banned from the Zandvoort Grand Prix, from the Dutch Grand Prix, because the drivers, very rightly, find the smoke very distracting when it blasts across the track and you're like, where the hell is that smoke coming from? So they were supposedly banned, and I was watching the coverage like, I can't see the crowds because they're covered in orange smoke. So that banning went super well. Well done race organisers, well done security on the gates, well done Dutch fans for sneaking them in. Anyway, Max Verstappen took the victory at his first home Grand Prix, which obviously made the crowds go mental. I've heard that the atmosphere there was absolutely incredible, and I can only imagine it was. To see a home driver win their home race with a home crowd. I've been at Silverstone, and I may not be the biggest Hamilton fan, but when he wins his home Grand Prix, it is an atmosphere. You're in that atmosphere. It is quite a lot. So I can only imagine what it was like for the Dutch fans there and everyone at the track who got to witness that amazing atmosphere when Verstappen took the win. There was nearly a minute between Verstappen and Bottas. Hamilton was 20 seconds behind. It's a fairly clean sweep for Verstappen. He did the job and he did it well. I don't remember anything too much happening in that race. Nothing stand out. So correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, because I'm trying to remember 11 races here. We're nearly up to date. We're nearly up to the ones that I'll remember better. So yes, the Italian Grand Prix was our second sprint race. McLaren were on form in the Italian Grand Prix weekend. And again, very unsurprising because Monza is an engine circuit, if ever there was one, with two very long straights, primarily just a triangle with a few chicanes in it, really. So very, very engine heavy circuit. It was not a surprise. McLaren were a force to be reckoned with at this circuit, and they took advantage of that Mercedes engine that is now powering them to really kind of put the middle down. Obviously, we have the lovely incident that happened, which was almost the reverse of Silverstone, of Verstappen and Hamilton coming back together. Again, this is very much the point I was making earlier. If the shoe was on the other foot, Verstappen would have too gone for that gap, which is why I was quite annoyed when Red Bull was starting making all these noises about getting Hamilton a race suspension. It was never going to happen, and it was going to be a way too big of a punishment for the crime committed, if you will. But yes, in the incident, the Verstappen-Hamilton incident, yeah, Verstappen knew he wanted to beat Hamilton out the pits. He did what he could. He squirted the throttle. He tried to make it work. He tried to force the gap open a little bit wider than so. Lo and behold, the incident happened. A shame he went over the top of the car, because that is always very scary to see. Another big nod to the Halo, doing its job once again in protecting the drivers as much as possible. Another example as to why those things are extremely important. I dread to think the outcome of that incident had the Halo not have been there, and the outcome of the incident was bad enough as it was. So not a nice incident, not a fun one to see, but lo and behold, the shoe on the other foot proving to be correct there, in the sense that they are both as bad as each other. Or as good as each other, depends how you want to look at that. A massive well done to Daniel Ricciardo and the McLaren team for finally getting their first win since 2012? 2013? Their first V6 turbo win, that's for sure. So a massive good job to them for that performance. You have to kind of squint your eyes a little bit though. Was Norris faster? The team wanted to protect the 1-2 result. You can completely understand that, especially when Ferrari are now starting to show a little bit more pace, a little bit more performance, and maybe starting to close that gap a little bit for third. And the constructors, you want to protect a 1-2 finish, right? You don't want to risk both your drivers taking each other out. Not only have you just lost a 1-2, you've now got to deal with two drivers internally who have just taken each other out of the race, each blaming the other. I can understand, I hate team orders, but I can understand why this one was done. It will always be a what if Norris was faster, but something we'll also never get the answer to. But a good job from McLaren all round on that one. Another kind of quiet performance from Ferrari for their home race, because again, you've got an engine dominant circuit and not a very good engine. Well, not a very good engine, but that's a bit harsh. Maybe just not the best engine on the grid. And if there's a better engine on the grid, that car is always going to perform better, because in terms of aero versus engine power is still more important than aero. You can change you have the best aero in the world, but if your engine is not there, you're not winning races. The guy with the worst aero but the better engine is going to beat you, because that's the way Formula One is currently, and appears to be remaining to be into the oncoming future. So let's hope something changes in 2025. Well, let's hope this is the dawn of an age of something that may actually change. We might actually have some fights on our hands. That would be great. Moving on to Russia, because I know I'm not giving these things a lot of detail, but we had a lot to get through, and I think I've already been recording for an hour. Yeah, I've already been recording for an hour, so I'm trying to speed through these things as much as possible. Don't worry, the US Grand Prix track talk will be back to the usual format, back to talking a lot about the race, news and stuff that's come out around that race, so do not panic. Normal track talk will be back soon. On to the Russian Grand Prix, which, oh, if heartbreak could be summed up in a race, I guess this is the one. Of the highs of Monza to the lows of Sochi, I guess, for McLaren, who had an amazing start with Norris, who put it on pole. He had Sainz for company. Sainz had managed to get the pass on him, but again, with that Mercedes engine on board, Norris had managed to get the lead back. He led, I reckon, most of that race. I think it was a 53-lap race. So it was a 53-lap race. He probably led 50 of the 53 laps. Maybe a few less, because Sainz did have the lead for a little bit at the start. It was his race to lose, very much so. And unfortunately, the rain had threatened at the start of the race, because I remember thinking, dear God, please don't let this be another Belgium. Because now we know that's the thing that can happen. It's always going to be a thing that floats around in people's heads when the rain starts coming. So it was a weird, damp race anyway, with tyres taking a lot of the talk about strategy and working things out. To be honest, if I was Norris at that point, you're leading the race, you're 5 laps away from your first F1 victory. Parts of the track are wet, parts of the track are dry. It is a coin toss as to whether to change to slicks or not. Sorry, to change from slicks to wets or not. I, like him, wouldn't have done it. I'd have taken the risk. The McLaren team were telling him the rain wasn't going to come down that much harder anyway. I really would have taken that risk. Unfortunately, it didn't pay off for him. He did come across the line 7th after dropping from 1st. So a real shame for him. And then Hamilton won again, but that's not really news at this point, is it? That's like saying Verstappen or Hamilton won, and you're like, yep, I knew that. At least we've got 2 different teams and names up the front now for that one. But yeah, a real shame for Norris, because obviously also off the back of being told to slow down and not pass Ricciardo in Monza, then kind of getting your chance to take the win and then having that cruelly stolen from you. It's a tough pill to swallow for sure. But his first win will come. He showed great racecraft, he showed great speed, he showed great race ability and handling the pressure well, knowing that Hamilton was closing down on him and still kind of not cracking. And the only mistakes he was making at the end there with Hamilton on his back was because he had no grip and the track was very, very wet. So I think he'll have his time again. He'll have his chance, maybe before the end of the season. Who knows? If McLaren have another good showing, I think he's definitely a shoe-in for a race win, definitely a podium. But it'll come. McLaren's in a very good place now compared to where it was 2-3 years ago. So yeah, his time will come. He'll get that win. It's just such a shame to see him lose it in the way he did. Hamilton won, and Verstappen, after taking a race penalty at the start for changing his engine, had an amazing recovery back to 2nd. Definitely not what Mercedes wanted, because Verstappen and Bottas and Leclerc had all taken engine penalties that race. So it really kind of taken 2 of the 4 front runners out before it even started. So Hamilton was obviously hoping to capitalize on getting some good points between him and Verstappen, and lo and behold, it was only the usual 7, if that's correct. Quick maths from me. So not the best race for Hamilton. Yes, he won it, but no, he didn't get that many points, as many as he wanted to, on his rival, because there he was up in 2nd, thanks to an early change onto the wet tyres and optimizing on that wet weather. And finally, we are at the Turkish Grand Prix, the last Grand Prix we had. We are up to date, lads and lasses. A quick round of applause for everyone for managing to stay with us and catch up with everything that I forgot to talk about over the last 6 months. But here we are at last race out, Turkey. Again, I am going to quickly whiz through this because I'm aware this video is too long already. But yes, how wonderful to see Valtteri Bottas finally back up on the top step of the podium, taking his 10th Formula 1 victory. I don't think we'll see him up on the podium again unless Hamilton is forced to take more engine penalties, which is a point of contention. You have to remember now that Verstappen has taken a full new engine. That was why he took the penalty drop in Russia, whereas at Turkey, Hamilton only took a 10-place grid, changing the internal combustion unit. There are 4 components of the F1 engine. If you change all 4, which is like gearbox, ICU, internal combustion, and maybe ERS system. I'm annoyed I can't remember the 4th. I had the other 3 for sure. There are 4 components basically. And if you change all 4, it's just a complete unit change. It's a 25-place grid drop. You're starting at the back or from the pits. Your choice really on that one. But when you only change one component, they've either got a 10-place drop or a 5-place drop. So Hamilton has only changed one element of his engine. Verstappen has a whole new engine, gearbox, whatever setup, right? A whole new internal setup, whereas Hamilton's only changed one element, which means he's also one away from each other element of getting a penalty if he changes them again. So he's on his limit. He's on his 3rd of each of those. So if they go to a 4th, they take the penalty. So if Hamilton has to take another internal penalty, that is going to be another grid drop. It's interesting why Mercedes didn't decide to just take them all in Turkey, do what Verstappen had done the race before, just take them all, take the hit, take the pain, get it done and dusted. Because now they race with the risk of if the gearbox goes, there's not just him out of the race for that race, but that's a 5-place grid drop as well for the next one. If the ICU goes, that's another big drop for the next one. So I don't really know why they didn't change everything, but lo and behold, they didn't. Turkey again was a talk of tyres. This was another rain dance situation. The weather's really been playing with the races the last few races, but to talk about the other stuff, a great performance from Red Bull with that 2-3. Still not quite enough with Hamilton in 5th to actually close the gap on Mercedes for the constructors. That went up by 6 points, even though they had 2 drivers on the podium. So a good job from Mercedes as well, albeit Hamilton complaining quite a lot about that late moment tyre change. It was worth it to hold on to those points. He was losing a lot of pace. I still think it was a good decision to pit him. They should have pit him with everybody else, sure, but hindsight's annoying, isn't it? So, you know, it is what it is. You live, you learn, you race, and you kind of get on with whatever you've got. So it was a bit like the Norris thing in Russia. You take a punt, you try and make it work. It worked for Ocon. He managed to go the whole race without changing tyres. His tyres were dead at the end of the race, and I think he finished, if not in the points, just outside them, but if he was in them, he was only just in them, so debatable as to whether that was really the way to go, but lo and behold, that was what it is. Other things to quickly talk about. Ferrari has now got both Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc on their new engine, which has been performing a little bit better the last couple of races. So tight fingers crossed for all the Ferrari fans out there that maybe Ferrari are back on an upward surge. Again, as I said earlier, I don't think it's going to be enough to get them to fight for the championship. I mean, they're mathematically not able to do that anyway. Now this far into the season, but it's good stead for them moving into 2022, and hopefully it's the right direction for them to be fighting back at the front next year. Final things to just go over, because we've been over a lot. What have we had signed? Everyone's signed up for next year now, aren't they? Apart from the one Alfa Romeo seat, which is supposedly being confirmed this weekend. George Russell and Lewis Hamilton confirmed now in Mercedes for 2022, which obviously I haven't spoken about already, but I'm quite glad that happened. I think Russell has proved his worth in having that chance to have that seat. I think Russell's also very aware that it's kind of a I'm going to be number 2 for the next 1, 2, maybe 3 years till Hamilton clears out. But he's in the best place to make that team his and kind of line himself up as the Hamilton heir, if you will, to the Mercedes throne. So it'll be good for him. I'm really excited to see what he does and how he goes this time next year, just next year in general in that car. He showed great speed and great racecraft in his one outing in Bahrain last year, I think it was. So hopefully that's a good kind of pedestal for him to start on, and he'll only do good things from there. Ferrari remains the same with Leclerc and Sainz. Red Bull stays the same with Verstappen and Perez. AlphaTauri stays the same with Gasly and Tsunoda. Getting into a little groove there, into a song. Trying to think of the others. Alpine is the same with Alonso and Ocon. Aston Martin is the same with Stroll and Vettel. Williams replaces Russell with Alex Albon. Latifi stays on board with them for another year. Alfa Romeo has Bottas, loses Raikkonen. Second seat to be confirmed because Mario Andretti might be buying Alfa Romeo. So there might be Coulter Hurton from IndyCar going into that second seat, which would be bye-bye Giovinazzi. That's rumoured, but heavily rumoured, so that should be being, if going to be confirmed, should be being confirmed this weekend, which makes sense. And that's another American team coming in at the American Grand Prix. Nicely done. Haas, I think, is confirmed to stay the same, and is still currently called Haas, which is the most surprising thing. So that's your driver market. At the moment, we just have the one seat remaining, and it's whether Giovinazzi is going to stay in it or if Alfa Romeo is selling to Mario Andretti, and if they are, then it's going to be probably an American and very likely Coulter Hurton in that second seat. So that'll be interesting. So hopefully this time next week or the week after, whenever the US Strike Tour comes out, I'll be able to speak more about that because we'll have that confirmed. So that's that. We've got Qatar is now confirmed as the circuit that goes after Brazil. Going to be interesting. I have no idea what that circuit layout is. I actually haven't seen any of it, so I need to have a look at that. That's a circuit that's coming in. Saudi's still looking as Saudi looked when we looked at the race stuff, I think last year when that was confirmed it was coming on. Again, we'll see. We'll see if that's a decent race or not. That one is coming up. And yeah, next one up, Austin. We didn't go to Austin last year. We are going to Austin this year. A circuit made of the best circuits of Formula One, with your 4 apex turns and your Copse Stowe, Maggots Beckett's even. Maggots Beckett's sector from Silverstone, that's kind of echoed in there as well. There's a load of bits from racetracks all over the world in this one. I don't know who's going to win, who's going to lose. Is it going to rain? Is it not going to rain? What's going to happen? I don't know. You tell me down in the coffee pot below, because that is it. We are finally up to date with everything, I think, going on in the wonderful world of F1 for 2021. I apologize again for this one taking so long to come out. I'm very sorry about that. Like I said, a lot of stuff was going on personally. It just didn't come to a point where I wanted to sit down and do them or had the time to sit down and do them. Kind of a toss up of the two. So I'm very, very sorry for the delay, but we are back. Here is the sum up of the last 6 months of F1. I will be back next time after the American Grand Prix. Please let me know your thoughts about everything going on. The championship, both championships, whose fault Britain was, whose fault Monza was, anything else. If you cried for Norris, if you were happy for Ricciardo, if you think Sainz could have won, if you think Gasly's doing a grand old job as per usual, let me know all of that decent, lovely, gorgeous stuff and carry on this conversation down in the coffee pot below. That is where I will be waiting for you to carry on this discussion. But for now, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. It's been an absolute blast as always. If you enjoyed this video, go show that like button some good old-fashioned F1 love. And if you want to support the channel, go hit subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss next time I upload a video. Stay awesome, and I will see you all in the next video! It's so hot in here. The heating's been on because we're having a problem with the internet, so that won't turn off. The door's closed. It's got really dark because the blind's closed. This video has descended into madness.